The general principle I think that we're going to try to lay out, 1 Timothy 3 tells us to have oversight. We are an overseer. If you desire to be an overseer, it's a noble task. 1 Peter 5:2 tells you to be like a shepherd. This is the Richard Baxter, smell like sheep. You need to kind of lead them to water and make sure they're healthy. And we've tried to create a board that says, okay, we want to do both of those things. And we did not feel, because of the generalities in Scripture, we did not feel that means that every elder has to do both things. But the board itself has to function in a way that both things are done for the health of the bodies.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
Hey guys, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. My name is Pastor Andrew. I'm here today with Pastor Bobby. We're going to be talking about, I think, something that is vital for the health and growth of our churches, which we understand that growth is going to be the key indicator of whether or not we're going to be able to grow and multiply. So it's very important for us to talk about church organization and leadership, and today we're going to get into the topic of elders. Specifically, we're going to spend time talking about what makes up a very good directional elder team. We're going to lay out some general frameworks here, and then we will make sure to describe the way we do it at Mercy Hill. It is not a prescription. It's a description, but I do think it's very important, Bobby, I'll even ask you right off the bat, it's very important that the elders of the church know exactly what you're asking them to do. Whether it be we view the elder board as the elder board needs to have shepherding and oversight. That doesn't mean every single guy needs to do all of that, right? So we actually have a board that is split between directional and shepherding. But if you don't have clear expectations for what the shepherding guy is supposed to do or the directional guy is supposed to do, I think things can get bogged very fast, and you can end up in this sort of morass of like, man, what exactly does it mean to shepherd, and what does it mean to provide oversight?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think for us, maybe it was because, I don't know, just like we're maybe hyper analytical, but I remember at the very beginning, you look out in church world and people are doing this a million different ways. Some of them seem biblically faithful, but ineffective. Some of them are biblically faithful, effective. Some of them, the whole church has gone off the rails because of the way that people do this.
It was effective maybe for a while, not biblically faithful maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you see churches, man, they take Acts 6, talk about deacons. Now all of a sudden the deacons are running the elder board and voting on
There's
stuff.
no elders at all.
All sorts of different stuff. Yeah, one of the things that I think we were trying to get away from is if you start from the very beginning, like, hey, elders, they're going to shepherd and they're going to do kind of the organizational stuff that you have to do as a church in 2025. You're a nonprofit and budgets and all this stuff. What some churches do is like, okay, they're like, we're not going to make any distinction between that. But what ends up happening is you have, an elder board or like kind of the decision-making board.
Right.
That ends up growing to some insane amount of people, 30 people, and you're never going to be able to make decisions with 30 people. And what ends up happening is you have pastors, elders, and we're using these terms synonymously, pastor, elder. They end up being about, budgets and all this other stuff, and they're not really doing the core duty of what a pastor is, which is to shepherd and protect people and teach people and pray. And so we were not clear on many, many things early on in the church, but I think we had kind of the framework of this in our minds when we started.
Yeah, I have two stories in my mind that I think maybe guys hearing this might identify with. So on one of them, there's a church that has not made, and these are just guys I'm talking to, have not made any distinction between shepherd and directional. And because of that, they have one board that has grown, but it's grown, they need the shepherds to... They need that number for shepherding, but because there's no distinction, now they have a church of maybe right around 1,000 that has like 14 elders that are, which is fine if they're shepherding, but now you got 14 elders that have to make, decisions around budget and ministry plan and probably a lot more than that, honestly, because a lot of these things become bigger, not smaller. It's almost like government or something. It just kind of eats up more and more. I mean, think about having to get 14 guys on the same page for a church just only running 1,000. That could be tough. It could slow things down. I talked to another guy today that has growing and blowing church, awesome church, young church planner, and some of the things they were talking about was like, man, is there much of a distinction between what we're asking our elders to do between shepherd, lay, shepherd and directional. And maybe there's almost been too much given over, in terms of the oversight stuff. Whereas we've tried to keep it really small, but maybe it's like, hey, no, this group of 3 or 4 is going to make every decision on every single thing for the church. And because of that, it can begin to slow things way down. And so we just want to try to give some principles around this. I want to organize this in 3 ways. So let's talk about some loose general principles of eldering. I know that's not a word, but eldering. And then we'll talk about we'll describe our shepherding model and our directional model that tries to get at both shepherd and oversight. So when it comes to church organization in 2025, the Bible gives us general principles, but we are having to apply those in real time in every generation and every culture. And I think the Scripture intentionally keeps these things very loose in order that we would have the freedom to do what we need to do. Now, some guys, immediately when you start going beyond the Bible, they start kind of really getting a little squirrely. You're becoming too pragmatic. The problem with that, of course, we've always said this on this podcast, we're all pragmatic. If you've decided to make your church a 501c3, if you have an elder covenant, if you have a member covenant where people actually sign it, if you have articles of disillusionment, none of these things are like, there's not a verse for any of this.
Right.
This is all attempts for guys to be faithful in their generation, working out general principles that we have in Scripture. So like in the book of Titus, the Scripture says appoint elders in every town. Well, it seems like they were appointing elders of, maybe of one church. We've decided to plant multiple churches even in one city. That again is a pragmatic principle that is kind of moving maybe beyond the Scripture, but we feel the freedom to do that because the Bible gives us these loose principles. So it's just important that we don't get too dogmatic about one way of doing things.
Yeah, I think for us, probably this is what you're saying, the driving kind of thought was like, okay, you have some elements that there's got to be a framework of being biblically faithful to what the Bible says about elders, and that's the starting point. Like right? There's no like disagree. I mean, like, hey, these guys got to have a certain type of character, their family has to be a certain way.
Right.
They have to be able to teach. There's just some basic things that the Bible is like super clear about. And then there's other things in addition to like, hey, we know they're supposed to be praying and teaching and shepherding people. There's a lot of other stuff that the Bible doesn't really speak to. And so we have to make the decision for us, okay, what model is biblically faithful? That's the starting point. But then what model is like ministry effective?
Right.
And I think we tried to design it around that because there's certain things that you could do just from a basic wisdom perspective that is like, hey, that's not going to be as effective as this thing over here. For example, what you have in churches sometimes is like, hey, the larger the church gets, kind of the more governance decision-making board, you could put any pastor on that board, right? But some guys are going to be more fitted for a board like that. Like our church at this point, I mean, the budget is very involved. We're having a church audit done every year. There's just some stuff where it's like, man, if a guy has some like financial acuity, he's maybe going to be in a better position to be on that board, versus somebody else. That's just one example of like, hey, biblically faithful, but how can we create this thing that's going to be the most effective for what we're trying to do?
Yeah, we believe that you need to have the freedom to pick the most effective option of biblically faithful options. So I think that some people might have a rub with that right there. Like when we say, I think there's probably 100 different ways you could sort of organize a church and they all be biblically faithful. I think that's true because the Bible just don't give us a lot on that. There's some ways that you could organize it that are not faithful, have one elder, don't have a plurality. I mean, there's a lot of things you could do. But generally, there's a lot of ways you can organize it and be biblically faithful. So if that's true, then we make the next step to say, well, then what's going to be really effective for the mission? What's going to help us be nimble, have the accountability we need, have the trust of our people because of the oversight that's happening with the personnel and the money and all that stuff. So we feel the freedom to do that. A couple things that are general principles that we all sort of know, but I would say Acts 6, 1 Timothy 3, elders and deacons are not the exact same thing. They have different roles. Elders serve by leading, deacons lead by serving. So they're kind of two different things there. You have the qualifications. You mentioned this, like, man, we can't skimp on that. Character, above reproach, not debauchery, able to teach. You kind of mentioned that. There's, obviously in 1 Timothy, but also Titus 1 talks about that. And the other thing I'll tell you, the general principle I think that we're going to try to lay out when we get into shepherding and directional here in a second is 1 Timothy 3 tells us to have oversight. We are an overseer. If you desire to be an overseer, it's a noble task. 1 Peter 5:2 tells you to be like a shepherd. This is the Richard Baxter, smell like sheep. You need to kind of lead them to water and make sure they're healthy. And we've tried to create a board that says, okay, we want to do both of those things. And we did not feel, because of the generalities in Scripture, we did not feel that means that every elder has to do both things. But the board itself has to function in a way that both things are done for the health of the body. So I think another framework we use for this as we get into it is shepherding is sort of about the organism of the church, the health, its growth as a living, moving being, okay? Directional is about the organization of the church. It's more about the oversight, the policies, and that kind of thing. And so we'll talk shepherding and directional, and that'll be our time. So let's talk shepherding for a few minutes here. Shepherding elders are guys who are involved in the lives of the sheep. They are not, that doesn't mean they're not interested in it. Their role has nothing to do with the organizational policies, hiring, firing. Their thing is not voting on a budget. I mean, none of that stuff. That's not what they're there for. They are there to smell like sheep, to be training, coaching our group leaders, make sure wolves are sniffed out, praying for our groups, handling pastoral issues that come out of our groups. Bobby, you were early on involved in this stuff, setting up what we call span of care, but talk about that. Just like, when these guys come on, we're giving them a set things that they need to do within a certain group of people at the church. It's called their span of care.
Yeah, I think for a lot of churches, if this is not defined early on, what happens is you bring a lay elder, so somebody that's not paid by the church, you bring them on, and if it's not super clear what they need to do, then people are just going to gravitate towards all sorts of different stuff. Some of these guys are going to be like, man, I need to be making the decisions on the board and voting on stuff. Other people are like, man, I'm going to try to pastor to people. And other people are like, I'm just going to wait till a crisis happens, and that's how I'm going to be involved. One of the things that we did very specifically is we had a real vision for, community groups and people finding community and being discipled in community groups. And so we said, hey, when it comes to being pastored at Mercy Hill, it's not that our shepherding elders won't take a meeting with somebody that's not in a community group or something like that, but primarily who they're focused on is the people that are in community groups in the church, because these are the people that have opted in to saying, man, I want to go deeper in my discipleship. These are the people that are essentially kind of the members of the church in many ways. A lot of churches, they're
functionally that.
Yeah, a lot of churches have some sort of like membership thing that you sign, but it's like these people are not involved enough that you can actually even pastor them. And for us, let's say a community group has 10 or 15 people in that group. A shepherding elder a lot of times will kind of be over like 5 of those groups. And I don't mean be over like leading the groups. The groups are led by under shepherds, people that are leading the actual community group. But the span of care, let's say those 5 groups represent maybe 75 to 100 people. What those shepherding elders are going to do is like, man, there's going to be stuff that comes up in those groups, a crisis situation, a big sin issue, church discipline situation, a family member dies, something like that. And sometimes the community group leader is like, hey, I'm kind of at the end of my rope in terms of my training, my know-how.
Right.
Like this situation is a little bit beyond even the time that I could put into it. And so our shepherding elders, man, that's their role.
Yeah.
So everything in the Bible that talks about pastoring and eldering and protecting and teaching, it happens in the context of that group of 75 to 100 people. Yeah,
and that's church discipline. They're pastoral issues like that are what they're doing. And one of the things that I always try to tell our shepherding elders, every time we do a shepherding elder commissioning, which generally is like once a year, we hand them an actual staff, like a shepherd's staff, like it's like a really nice. And we tell them like, hey, this is the role. The role is, the staff is used really for two things, to protect, but also to prod, so we got to prod the sheep towards health, toward green pastures and towards the right water and making sure they're healthy. But then we also need to protect the sheep. And we try very hard to tell them like, this is the role. Sometimes that role is high intensity, man. You got 3 or 4 community groups or 5, and you got some marriage stuff going on, and you got different, but there are guys that walk through an entire session of our groups and probably just have one phone call with their group leader and nothing really comes up. And we try to tell them like, man, that the amount of time put in is not the point. The point is there's somebody on the wall, looking. And sometimes there's intensity in that, sometimes there's not, but there's somebody there that community group leader is not on an island, but they have somebody that knows, man, that's a direct line to a campus pastor. That's a direct line to the staff, whatever we need. And so they can be there for them. I think it helps them too immensely to be told on the front end, like, man, personnel budgets, decisions about how many services we're going to do for Easter, different hiring, firing, like that has nothing to do with them. And the reason it's so good to tell them that is a lot of people say, well, that person's an elder, they should know. And, like whatever's going on at the church. Like, hey, the church decided to do this. They made this decision. I don't like it. And you're an elder. And you should know about that. And it's like we are trying to be like, no, they shouldn't. Why would they know about that? That has nothing to do with what they're doing. What they're doing is the group's lane, health and care and welfare of the church. We've tried to help those guys be let off the hook. It's like, well, I heard they're planting a campus here or there. What do you know about that? I'm like, they probably don't know anything about it because that's just not really the role that they're in, And I think that just leads us right into the last thing, which is directional elders. In the very same way, if the shepherding elders are looking out for the organism, the directional elders are looking out for the organization. If the shepherding elders are doing that, they're shepherding the flock, then the directional elders are the ones that are overseeing the flock as a whole, kind of seeing over the organization of it. And this is, I think the beauty of this is why I like, and we took our model from the summit, but I really like the model of not having every shepherding elder feel like they got to be a directional elder too. The inherent rub is, if every shepherding elder is a directional elder and your church begins to grow, you're going to end up needing more shepherding elders, but you don't want to put them on that board because it's going to complicate the directional elder board way too much. Like I said, the Church of 1,000's got 14. That's too much. It's just hard to make decisions. And so this model gives us the freedom to say, guys, we're doing the best we can with the shepherding side. And now we have a group of guys, and you can talk about this, a group of guys whose focus is on more of the organization. Bobby, talk to us a little bit about, it's a small team, 5 elders. Talk to us about the makeup of that team and who is on that team and who we feel like is going to be really good for that team.
Yeah, so for us, the way that we've organized it, this is kind of the ultimate accountability, decision-making part of the church. So churches do this a lot of different ways. We say that we're Jesus-ruled, elder-led. Some people are more congregationally ruled. We have chosen this model because we feel like the most amount of language in terms of leadership in the New Testament is given to the shepherd, given to the pastor. And so that's how we've set this up. What they are primarily doing and the way the team works is, okay, there's kind of a couple different things you want to avoid. And I've been on other boards, nonprofit boards that are not church world, but this board can't be making like every decision because that's really going to like slow things down. There needs to be people that this board has appointed, and that's you and me and our leadership team, to be able to make like the vast majority of decisions on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, week-to-week, month-to-month sort of basis. What this board is doing is like, hey, there's 5 or 6 really key things from a high level that, this board is, in many ways, they're just kind of like oversight and accountability for those decisions. Because a lot of times they're not even driving the decisions. Right. You're driving the decisions, or we're driving the decisions, or our leadership team they put the most amount of thought behind it. But this board is more of like the accountability. These guys all, they're all shepherds. Like they all went through the character process. Man, they can teach, they can lead community groups. So we've taken them out of that pool of people And we basically just said, man, who is going to be most effective in terms of maturity, background, experience, age to help us to make decisions,
Right.
to hold us accountable, to hold the staff accountable, and then also just be able to care for us in terms of
Right.
just like, man, they're older guys, lifespan,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So that's kind of generally how we kind of thought of the team, and we've had different kind of iterations of this. And this is a great team. There's 5 of us right now.
Yeah.
You and I are both on this team from the staff perspective, and then there's 3 guys that are on this team from a lay perspective. We don't vote on a ton of stuff, but we will vote on stuff. And kind of the idea is that the team would pretty much be unanimous when we vote on this stuff.
Yeah, we haven't had like a dissenting opinion. I mean, we just, I think if there was a real dissent, it would be like we'd all probably pause, like, all right, well, we need to maybe hold off for a second here,
Right.
I think it's important to note that what you said is right. The directional team for Mercy Hill, by and large, this is the way we want to have it totally set up. Is those guys are coming off of the shepherding elder team. I think one of our guys right now didn't come off the shepherding elder team. He was kind of tapped and went through the shepherding elder process.
Right.
We already had in mind, he was probably going to be on the directional team. But generally, they're coming out of that shepherding, kind of pool, and that shepherding pool has been affirmed by the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our decision. It's the directional elder board's decision of who's going to be on that board, but the congregation has affirmed who's going to be in the pool, I guess you could say, in terms of just on the front end of their process, before they're put onto that board. So I think it's very important, just like the shepherding elders, that the directional elders know what they're there to do. And, we've had to work with our directional team on this. We've had to figure out for us, like, man, what do we need from them and all that. It can be very easy for the directional team to start to kind of, all in good intentions, want to do more. We want to start mentoring the young staff, or we want to start, getting in the weeds on this particular ministry or that particular ministry. And I just know some friends of mine that just have horror stories of not clearly defining what the directional elder role is. And so therefore, the directional elders, instead of viewing themselves as like a 30,000 foot accountability, they view themselves as like a peer to the pastors in terms of like, hey, everything we do has got to run through me before we get voted on it, or this, or I need to be in that meeting, or I need to be in this. And the problem with that, of course, is not the accountability side. The problem, of course, is that they also have a real job.
Right.
They don't, you and I and our staff, like, this is what we've done for 40 hours this week. And now a guy who has not done it at all comes in and is like, okay, well, you need to download to me everything about how you got to the decision that you're going to make. That's crazy, right? Like, that doesn't, there's no way he's not going to be in the epistemic position to even know like how we got to this. Or, so what you need is you need the guys that are 30,000 foot that can just from a high level look in and say, that way, if it's 1 degree off or 2 degrees off, the thing's going to self-correct as we move. If all of a sudden they look down and they're like, dude, the finances just took a left turn. This is crazy. We were one way and now we are a different way, or man, we were preaching the Bible in this kind of genre and now all of a sudden we're not preaching the Bible, big stuff like that. Hey, we're got to hire and fire associate director, whatever. Those guys don't need to be in on that. We're talking about firing me. We're talking about firing you, or having to replace, or one of us leaves and we got to, okay, now they're at a high level going, well, we probably need to be involved in that. So we want to try to make sure that these guys are very, tuned in to what the organization needs from them. And I think that helps things move along and helps speed. It's very important to remember, the 4 tires that can run over the hose that's got growth coming out of it, is, we've said a million times, the parking lot, the kid space, the auditorium space, those are all kind of no-brainers. The last one is the speed and decision-making.
Mm-hmm.
If every week you have to have a 3-hour meeting with 7 dudes to figure out if we're going to do another service, you're going to be so far behind by the time you needed to have made the decision. You were involved in this. We were constructing, what are the 6 things that they're going to do. I figured we could end this podcast just by walking through them, and then I'm going to make one more, maybe we'll make one more appeal to like, hey, if you're listening to this, you have elders, you haven't clearly defined what they do. This may be a major sticking point in your organization because they're trying to do it all. They're doing nothing. Some of them are doing stuff like it's just not going to move if we haven't defined for them. So from the directional team, let's walk through the 6 things. I'll comment on them as you go, Bob.
Yeah. So this is not just original to us. There's other churches that use these types of frameworks in their bylaws. Man, it's hard to find this type of personality to get on this team that has the right experience, that they're going to be able to balance these things, because these things, somebody that is very high level thinker and can kind of prioritize data and not want to get into all the weeds is the right personality for this team. Mm-hmm. If you just put, any random person on that team, some people are just going to struggle because they don't get all of the information and they're going to want to be in everything, and it's going to slow things down, like you said. So we try to define very clearly up front, okay, what is it? And the guys that we have on this team, they absolutely are the right, makeup, the right spirit, the right wiring. It's so helpful for us. So number one, there's just 6 of these. Number one is, the highest level of approval of like budget stuff. I've been on boards where it's like, literally every week we're like approving, some a $500 purchase or $800 purchase, and it's like, it will bog everything down. Yeah. What our directional elders do is they approve the budget in general. So we go through a long process before the next, calendar year starts. We do a full audit with an outside firm, and, these guys are not getting into like the nitty gritty of our chart of accounts, which is probably hundreds, 200 or 300 accounts. It's like, hey, here's the income of the church. Here's the expenses, here's the personnel costs. Here's the ministry costs. Here's what's going to church planning and missions. Here's what we brought in last year. And they help kind of make the decision. We all do together, what can we project for the upcoming year, and what can we vote on in terms of expenses? You want to say anything about that?
Only that, they're not yes men. I mean, these guys, when we have our meeting once a month, it's like they may have 2 questions about it, but their questions are going to be about like, hey, these were huge gaps. What happened exactly? They're not getting into the weeds. It's more just like spot checking, looking around. And then also I think, it's great to have that audit because they're, they can have, it gives everybody confidence to know, the money's going where it says going.
Right. The second one is yearly ministry plan. And what we mean by this is, like, we're not one of these churches where every single year it's like a different game plan, a different direction. We generally have a vision where we're going for 10 years. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, what we're doing over the next 90 days. But each year there's going to be somewhat of a focus, so this year, moving into our new home and hub and all that, we thought, we really want to double down on this vision for college ministry, for student ministry, for kids ministry. So that's what we mean by kind of the ministry plan for the year. Hey, generally what we're doing is what we've been doing. We're going to keep doing the same thing, but there's kind of a 10% emphasis where we may want to put some more money towards that. We may want to put some more staffing. You may cast some extra vision towards that. And so it really kind of helps align that team and align them for, where the church is going for the upcoming year.
Yeah, and the good thing about the ministry plan is a 1-page document, maybe half a page document. It's just like we know where we're going, but that's the 90%. This is the 10%. But it does give them something to evaluate me and you on too, or a few things to evaluate me and you on. Yeah. So we want to be evaluated on just general health metrics of the church every year. Is it growing? Baptisms. Financial, we want to just know, but then this gives us another layer of kind of, you were wired this way. It gives us another mountain to go after.
Yeah. Number 3, and this is what people are most familiar with, these types of boards, or, some churches congregationally, ruled. Number 3 is debt and financial purchases. So, any kind of big debt. So, it has here in our bylaws, exceeds 20% of the church's annual budget. So, not something that's like small, like, hey, we're taking debt for this thing, but it's like, a large kind of the church taking on debt. This team is going to have to be completely unified around that. And just like really big purchase type stuff, so this is not once the budget's already made, hey, can we go spend on this or spend on this? These are big kind of direction changes, changes in terms of our balance sheet, wanting to take on more debt. Mm-hmm. This team is like, the congregation can know, somebody's got oversight over this stuff.
Right.
Like you and I can't just go grab $20 million of debt in the church's name without this team being unified around that. Number 4, organizational policies. And so as a church grows, I would just encourage anybody that's listening to this. This is the stuff that they don't teach you in seminary, but is absolutely just crucial. 2025 as a church grows.
I don't think they teach any of this stuff in seminary.
Especially not this stuff
that we're talking about today.
There's just organizational, maybe they do in some seminaries, but there's just organizational policies and procedures that the larger you get, like, man, you're putting the church at risk by not having some of those things.
Right.
You know, you have conflicts of interest that are so easy to kind of get into without any sort of ill intent. And other things like that, you know, like, man, doing something that would forsake your nonprofit status if you want to continue to keep that. And so, man, this team kind of approves those big organizational policies.
Yeah, and they to me, give us a lot of confidence because I just love knowing, like, man, me and you are kind of out there in the arena, so to speak. But, I mean, I just feel like we're never alone, you know? Like, a church that grows, you get criticism all the time. Like, we're gonna get criticized as being mega this, or you're too worried about numbers, or, you know, certainly churches have gone off the rails by not having organizational policies and stuff. But it gives me a lot of confidence knowing that there's a group of guys that's not just me or you out there, but there's a group of guys who have kind of locked arms together to say, hey, if somebody doesn't like the way we've set this policy up, man, they're critical of the church, they're really throwing that shade on all of us. It's not just on Andrew. It's not just on Bobby, you know, and it gives me a lot of confidence to say, okay, we've decided this together. I'll give you an example. Like right now I'm working on this book coming out in January around adoption and foster care and our story and the church's story about Chosen and all that. And you're trying to figure out, man, how do you work with all this? Like, man, you know, I'm using a church computer to write a book, but the church doesn't own the book. And it's just this and so being able to express all that to these directional elders and for them to be like, all right, well, let's work on a policy here that works for everybody and get that locked in so that we all feel good about it, you know? And then once it's like, man, I know we all are on the same page, it just gives me a lot of confidence to be able to run. So I think the organizational policy stuff is not just eye roll boring, but, you know, some of it I think can be a real confidence builder when you have a team that is all saying the same thing.
Yeah, totally. Number 5 is they help determine the compensation for our highest level leaders. So this starts with you and kind of trickles down, but it really just is the top couple of leaders, that kind of top team of the church. You know, and this is useful in many different ways. I mean, this is one of those things, if you're a pastor, you know this, there can be so much controversy around this. You know, sometimes the average people in the church are fine with pastors making whatever amount of money as long as it's not more than them.
That's hilarious.
It's kind of just the general principle. You know, but like, man, this team, you know, they put some data around this of like, man, you know, how long has this person been in this position? Like, what is the size of the church? What is the leadership required? And it's not just you or me or some other, just somebody's opinion pulling this out of thin air. You know, and for us, it's not even those guys pulling it out of thin air, you know, because we're going to use compensation studies. And this is one of those things that's like, hey, like other practical things, it's not in the Bible. So if it's not in the Bible, then, you know, the first place we go to is like, what's a best practice? Like, what is a best practice in the world for how to determine somebody's salary? And it's like, well, most industries have salary studies, you know? Yeah. Like, man, if you're an engineer with 10 years of experience that has a master's degree, then it's like, well, there's probably a range for that, you know?
Right.
And we just kind of do the same thing with our compensation. It just, man, it's so helpful. It's another pair of eyes. It's not just you and I driving this. You know, like we're thinking about our own salary. It's like, man, people could underpay themselves, overpay themselves, think about it the wrong way. Having somebody that's like, man, they get no financial benefit from determining what our salaries are going to be. Super helpful. Number 6, personnel oversight. This in many ways is still kind of at the highest level, you know, because as the church grows, man, they can't have personnel oversight over every single person on our staff. It's just unworkable. You know, we have a staff now of 75, and so their oversight is over kind of the top level leaders. You know, make sure you don't just on a whim fire me or somebody else on our, you know, main leadership team. Man, if you were to be gone for some reason, like this team, it's not up to me to be like, man, what are we going to do here? Like this team is going to come together. Right. Maybe other examples that you can think of is kind of personnel stuff.
Well, I think in my mind, the personnel bucket also includes like they functionally act like a community group for me. You know, I think being the lead communicator can produce a lot of complexities when it comes to being in a community group. I don't know that would be as bad if we were not in a sermon-based model, you know, where a lot of the group structure is based around what was preached. And so when you're the one preaching and you walk into a group and, you know, it's like, hey, how'd this hit you? And somebody really wants to say like, I didn't understand that. And I'm not sure I'm trying to figure it out, but they're like, well, I can't say that because he's in the room, you know? So it just creates some complexities. And so I think that having a group like this, that are guys who, man, every month when we come together, you know, I mean, we get the chance to hear how they're doing. We're praying for them too, but man, they make it real clear. Like, hey, dude, we're here for you, man. Like, we're here to be like a rear guard, man, to watch your back. If you need us to take some heat off of you for something that's going on, critique, whatever, like that's just, man, they're there for that. And they're very, very much behind us. And you know, even when you think about compensation, all that, like those guys want to be super fair, but they have a generous spirit, you know, I don't even mean like financial compensation, but just their demeanor towards me, our family. What do you need? You know, how can the church help you do, function better? You know, just, I don't know. They just have a real eye on I'd say us, but even maybe more particularly me, just in terms of just the weight it is to communicate, you know, for a church our size every single week. And so they're in it with the personnel on the lead team level.
And I would say if anybody doesn't have this, I would just encourage somebody, man, you need to pray for this and start capturing a vision for this, because like for us here at Mercy Hill, just to kind of give people kind of under the hood how it works, we have a leadership team. You know, there's like, I think 7 of us on that team. We're all staff, and those relationships couldn't be any closer than they are. You know, we have a great relationship. But what I would just encourage people with is like, man, even though, you know, I'm so close with all those guys, I can't always burden those guys, you know, with everything that's going on in my life. I certainly would trust them with it, but it's, man, those guys are carrying enough stuff with their leadership at the church, you know, and you don't want to always burden me, and I don't want to always burden you. It's great to have some other guys. And just as it's worked with our team, you know, these guys are sort of a generation ahead of us. Right. You know, some of them,
grandfathers.
Yeah, some of them have kids that are our age. And so I can just feel confident, you know, go to lunch with one of those guys and just, man, share, hey, here's how you can pray for my wife. Here's how you can pray for us. Here's how you can pray for our kids. We just need you know, man, I mean, you see people that fall out of ministry, you see lead pastors that fall out of ministry. A lot of times it's because they don't have that.
Yeah.
You know, and I thank God for the guys that we have on our team. It took a while to build. Yeah. You know, and to have the vision for it. I mean, it probably took 5 or 6 years. Yep. To get to the point where it is now. Yeah. So. Well,
my final charge on this would just be like, man, let's be really clear about what you want these guys to be doing. As a board, you need to shepherd and provide oversight, organization, very important. So I would just say, hey, are you being incredibly clear on what you're asking these guys to do? Are you asking them to do too much because you're putting two things together that maybe as a church grows is going to be hard to hold together, you know, in terms of all the shepherding that needs to be done and all the oversight that needs to be done? And if so, is there a way to address that? Hey guys, that's it for today. If you got thoughts around this particular podcast, man, get on our Facebook group, Breaking Barriers Facebook group, and man, join that, drop a line. We love to answer any questions that we can. We have a lot of questions many times around elders and around how to navigate different things with boards. So we'd love to get into more of that online. Thanks.